In the storm-laden world of Port Charles, where love is rarely without its price and trust can shatter in a single breath, a brutal and unexpected act of violence changed everything. What began as a volatile argument between Drew and Nina unraveled into something far more dangerous, something that not only sent Nina into emergency surgery, but also sent emotional shockwaves through the lives of those closest to them. As Drew stood over Nina, blood staining his hands and his past catching up to him in the most horrific way, he realized too late that some lines, once crossed, can never be retraced. The fight between Drew and Nina had simmered for days, if not weeks. What had started as tension around business, secrets, and lies eventually combusted into full-blown fury. Nina had confronted Drew with suspicions that he had been manipulating others around Willow and even Michael for his own self-serving plans. Drew, raw and cornered, lashed out, not just verbally, but physically. In one tragic moment, anger gave way to brutality, and Nina was left bleeding from a stab wound. The incident rocked Port Charles, leaving even the most hardened residents stunned. Nina was rushed to General Hospital in critical condition, and the entire community held its breath, watching and waiting to see if she would survive. But while Nina fought for her life in a sterile hospital room, the deeper wounds were unfolding elsewhere, inside Willow. The woman who had once clung to Drew for emotional strength and familial solidarity suddenly found herself looking at a stranger. The man she thought she understood was now someone capable of irreversible harm, and in that realization, something inside her collapsed. The illusion of safety, of future, of trust, it all crumbled. Willow did not scream. She did not cry. She simply walked away. The break was clean but not painless. Her decision to leave Drew cut through him in ways that even he hadn't expected. For someone who had long claimed to be the moral compass in their entangled web of relationships, Drew was now lost in the very darkness he once condemned in others. For Drew, Willow's rejection was a deeper wound than any legal charge or public humiliation. He had already been under pressure. From business failures, from public scrutiny after his actions during the SEC debacle, and from a lingering identity crisis stemming from years of deception and secrets. But nothing hurt more than Willow leaving. She had been his anchor, and now she had torn herself free. Friends turned cold. Allies became cautious. Even Scout, his own daughter, began to ask questions that Drew couldn't answer. The weight of it all bore down on him like a judgment he couldn't escape. Meanwhile, Willow, carrying the heavy emotional burden of betrayal, did not retreat to solitude. Elizabeth, ever the nurturer, reached out with a heartfelt offer, inviting Willow to stay at her home until things calmed down. It was a generous act, filled with compassion and understanding. Elizabeth had seen heartbreak, she knew what it looked like in someone's eyes. But Willow, still caught in the paralysis of grief and determination, declined. She wasn't ready to be someone's guest, to accept someone else's roof, someone else's sympathy. She needed something that belonged to her. A space where she could reorient her broken life. Instead, Willow turned to someone familiar, someone whose presence had always been synonymous with stability and comfort, Michael. The father of her children. The man who had once stood beside her through love, birth, illness, and separation. Their relationship had been fractured by time and circumstance, but it had never truly died. Now, for the sake of her children and perhaps for the sake of herself, Willow asked Michael if she could move back into his home. She did not ask for romance, or reunion, or promises. She asked for a foundation, solid ground beneath her feet, and a chance to rebuild for Wiley and Amelia, who needed their mother to be strong even when the world was crumbling around her. Michael agreed, not out of obligation, but out of a quiet recognition that what Willow needed was something he could give. He had also suffered in silence, watching Willow entangle herself with Drew, watching Nina manipulate the lines of power and loyalty, and watching his own family disintegrate under the weight of old wounds. With Willow's return to his home, a new rhythm began, not romantic, but restorative. For the first time in months, the house felt like a sanctuary again. Amelia's giggles returned. Wiley slept better. And Michael found a sense of peace in Willow's silent resilience. But nothing in Port Charles stays still for long. Drew's public image deteriorated quickly. The community turned against him. Carly, once a fierce defender, now kept her distance. Jason, always Drew's complicated mirror, offered no protection. Even Sonny, whose hands were not clean, looked upon Drew with cold disdain. Drew had not only injured Nina. He had shattered the fragile balance in town, a balance everyone had fought to preserve. At the hospital, Nina's condition remained precarious. She drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by memories and half-truths. When she awoke, she was met with silence, no Drew, no forgiveness. Only Ava visited, perhaps out of guilt, or perhaps because she, too, understood what it felt like to be betrayed by those closest to you. For Nina, survival was no longer just about healing her body. It was about facing a future where her daughter, Willow, now saw her through the eyes of a victim and not as a mother. Willow's relationship with Nina, already fragile after a lifetime of lies, felt irreparably shattered. Any faint glimmers of forgiveness that had once stirred inside her were now extinguished. Watching her own mother lie broken in a hospital bed did not inspire pity, it solidified a boundary. She could not reconcile the woman who tried to buy love with the woman who was now nearly killed by a man she had supported. It was too much. Too twisted. Too late. Yet even as one chapter closed, another began to stir. Willow, living again under Michael's roof, began to rediscover herself, not as a partner, not as a daughter, but as a mother and as an individual. Her days were no longer about healing Drew's wounds or mediating between Michael and Nina. They were about bedtime stories, family dinners, and early morning walks with Wiley. She began volunteering again at the hospital, slowly reclaiming her identity through small acts of service. Elizabeth noticed the change, strength forged from loss. Michael, too, underwent a quiet transformation. Living alongside Willow reminded him of what once was, but also of what could be, if forgiveness was ever possible. But he didn't push. He didn't demand closure. He simply offered consistency. Something rare in a town of shifting alliances and secret agendas. And Drew? He remained an outcast. Though he wasn't imprisoned, the incident was ruled as an act of temporary emotional insanity, his freedom was hollow. No one trusted him anymore. His company floundered. His friends retreated. And in the end, he found himself exactly where he had always feared being, alone, misunderstood, and spiraling into darkness. Port Charles did not forget what happened. Whispers of Drew's violent turn continued to echo through the community halls. And Nina, despite surviving, would never be the same. Her scars, visible and invisible, reminded everyone that violence often comes not from strangers, but from those we once loved most. But amid the wreckage, something unexpected began to grow, a fragile piece. Willow, more empowered than ever, began laying down new roots. Michael, steady and mature, supported without demanding. The children thrived. And while love was not reborn instantly, there was a new kind of family, formed not from passion, but from pain, forgiveness, and resilience. Because in Port Charles, nothing is ever truly over. There are only beginnings that come disguised as endings. And for Willow, Michael, Nina, and even Drew, this was not the end of their stories. It was merely the end of an illusion, and the beginning of truth.